Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We have a few people that have joined up, and we'll just wait for a couple more, but we'll get started pretty soon because we've got quite a lot of content to get through today. So I'll just kick off. So thank you everyone for joining us today for our webinar, Virtual Power Plants, How to Unlock the Value of Flexibility. Before we get started, I'll run through some brief housekeeping. So today's session will be recorded and it will last around 30 minutes. We'll send the recording after the webinar via email so you can rewatch it at any time, share with your team, whichever you prefer. Also, there is a Q&A function that's available throughout. If you do have any questions, please put them in there and we'll try and answer them at the end. If we don't have time to answer questions, we'll just follow up after the webinar. Cool, so we'll move on to introduction. So I'm Emma Lovell. I'm the head of marketing at Electron and I'll be your host today. I'll pass over to Chris and Matt to introduce themselves. So Chris, if you want to kick off.
Yeah, afternoon, everybody. My name's Chris. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Electron. So I'll be covering today the UK and Europe perspective, at least, on VPPs and how they've evolved. And I'll hand over to Matt.
Hi, everyone. Matt Brown, founder of Twyman & Co., a small consulting firm focused on the energy transition, principally here in the US. And I will be speaking a bit about the implications of flexibility and flexibility markets here in the US.
Cool, thanks guys. So in today's session, we'll be running through three main agenda points. So the first one, what is virtual power plants? Two, how have virtual power plants evolved in the UK and Europe? And three, what role do neutral market platforms play for virtual power plants? So I'll pass over to Chris and he's going to kick off and discuss the role of virtual power plants.
Great. So yeah, I thought it was worth setting some context for the rest of the webinar. VPP, virtual power plant, it's a term that's used quite a few different ways. So we thought, let's start with at least our perspective on how we define it and what makes up a virtual power plant. I think there's probably just two things really that constitute a virtual power plant from our perspective. The first is it's an aggregation of a number of distributed energy resources. So if a power plant is just one resource, a virtual power plant is many resources, and they're aggregated and they're coordinated and they're optimized. The second distinction, which sometimes isn't always used, is that they're traded and treated like a single asset. So it's not just that they're aggregated and controlled together, it's that they're sold into markets and to deliver some form of value. So those two component parts we think are what makes up a VPP. Not just aggregation, but aggregating it and then trading it or using it like a power plant. And there's different types of VPP. We'll touch on this in more detail later, but I'd say historically and at least typically, most VPPs tend to be made up of a certain type of asset. It might be that they're mostly an aggregation of electric vehicles, or they focus just on aggregating and optimizing solar, PV, and battery. We think that that's kind of the first iteration of VPP, and to start to push the boundaries, we should start to include a broader range of assets, and we'll touch on how we think we can do that further down the line. And then in terms of some of the benefits of VPP, this is true of most low carbon technologies, but the benefit of aggregating them and trading them into traditional markets and local flexibility markets is that you can start to offset some of your wholesale costs. In the US, your resource adequacy can be reduced by using the energy that's made up of that VPP. If we're being smarter with the grid and being more efficient with the capacity that's being used on the grid, we can also start to justify connecting assets faster than we otherwise could have. And on a related point, we can also potentially start to defer some of those grid reinforcements. So we absolutely need to build more grid, and that has to happen and will happen regardless. But we can also be smarter with the grid that we've got. And that's one of the key roles that VPPs, virtual power plants, can play. It's being smarter with the resources that we have connected to the grid and using them to create more capacity on the network and to reduce costs for consumers too, which again is a feature of VPPs, but of most low carbon technologies and flexibility generally. This is about creating a faster cheaper path to net zero. And VPPs are a really exciting tool to help with that. So given the definition and the context, then just wanted to touch a little bit on how they've evolved in the UK and Europe, what we've seen here in the continent in Europe and the UK, and how that's evolved into a few different use cases, and then potentially what are the lessons that the US could learn in that context. So the origins of VPP, make some generalizations, I guess, but one of the main origins for VPP was around a microgrid use case where you had this small community or an island part of the network far away from the kind of generation assets, and a need or a desire to be able to self-supply, to use some local embedded generation and their connected demand assets to balance within the community themselves and to use the energy that's generated and stored within that microgrid. And that was the, one of the first applications for a virtual power plant. Let's create our own small virtual power plant for our community or for our microgrid. And then as that started to catch on and people realized that you could create a power plant using distributed resources that are coordinated together, we started to see and are starting to see that concept being applied at a more larger scale, at a national level. There's some changes in the UK and Europe that are allowing aggregated resources to play into national markets. So that's taking that same concept and now applying it at a much larger scale and unlocking much more value and the potential for concepts like VPP. And I think, Matt will probably touch on it later, but FERC 2222 is a great example of how that's also playing out in the US and where VPPs are going to play an increasingly important role. And again, this is all about accelerating that transition to net zero at the lowest possible cost. And VPPs are a great tool. They're allowing you to participate with less friction and to maximize the value. And so the story we've seen in UK and Europe is it started small, but it's starting to be used at a greater scale. But there's more still to be done. And we'll touch on some of the ways we think we can unlock that over the next few slides. So then just comparing that to the US. So in Europe and the UK, I guess you could say we focus more on VPPs as a generation tool. Whereas in the US, we're seeing it being used in a demand response context. So a tool to deliver demand response for a certain type of technology. In the UK and Europe, we're seeing that in order to start to scale VPPs, market platforms like Electron Connect, the platform we've built, are being used as a tool to optimize that complexity of different technology types, different types of VPP across a utility's numerous programs, efficiency programs, and demand response programs. Market platforms are being seen as a way to standardize the upfront processes of onboarding and enrolling VPPs and the assets that are within them into programs like demand response and VPPs, and also the downstream processes of the measurement and verification and settling and then paying invoices. A market can streamline both of those things, and we think that's key to driving up adoption of VPPs and unlocking the scale that they can bring. And we know, just like in the UK and Europe, that there's going to be a huge uptake of EVs, electrified heating and transport, really at that hockey stick moment, that inflection point where we're going to see a rapid increase in the amount of resources that are connecting. So just like the UK and Europe, there's an increasing and compelling need to start to tap into those new DERs more effectively. And that's exactly where VPP is going to help. They're a way of aggregating those resources. And the question is then, how do we bring that all together? How do we connect multiple VPPs within an existing utility or within multiple programs?
Cool, thanks, Chris. So Chris has touched on markets as a concept, which is a fairly new term in the US. Matt's going to explain a little bit more about what this means in the US's capacity. So over to you, Matt.
Great, thanks, Emma. So Chris has outlined a number of implications for VPPs. I think it's useful to take just a quick step back and look at the existing landscape. We know this legacy system in the US has been evolving for years now. Traditionally, power generated at large utility scale facilities, pass through the transmission system to the distribution network where utilities deliver it to the end customers. As smaller generating assets, demand side resources have continued to proliferate, we started to see these resources provide value at both levels, transmission and distribution, which is adding some significant complexity to the operation of these markets and of these networks. One persistent element in the US is one of fragmentation. So it's certainly far from a uniform national market. Each regional wholesale market or ISO region carries individual economic and participation considerations. More granularly, each utility service territory at the distribution level has individual incentive programs, different participation pathways for DERs. And really, it's the diversity of these programs for flexibility and the associated wholesale products that is challenging for these asset OEMs, the aggregators, to bring flexibility to scale. We've seen the evolution from the traditional demand response products and programs to more widespread adoption of time of use retail rates, using the tariff structure as an incentive for load shifting, shaping. We've seen the emergence of bring your own device programs from utilities, which help enable the participation of multiple different asset types, whether those are smart thermostats, water heaters, EV chargers, storage, etc. And one of the important elements here is, as the VPPs are expected to comprise an increasingly diverse set of assets and resources, potentially span across different customer segments and different parts of the network, how can those aggregations deliver their full economic value? We see on this slide, you have region-specific aggregations, technology-specific aggregations, which have traditionally been pointed at individual products, individual value elements of the proverbial value stack. But today, really only partial stackability exists in looking at how these resources can capture and deliver the most value to the network. One of the key challenges is data access, a key barrier. We at Electron and certainly others across the industry have been working to remove friction from that challenge, in the sense of utilities providing meter data access. Green button has been enabling standard on that front. But we really need to support with all these third-party managed aggregations the ability for those resources to provide the full value to deliver cost efficiencies and value to the ratepayers as a whole. Key message here: as complexity continues to increase at both the transmission and distribution levels, enabling access to data for these third parties to operate these VPPs, deliver flexibility, can help deliver critical cost efficiencies across the board. So as Chris alluded to, one of the key challenges that Electron Connect and these neutral market platforms can offer is the ability for a utility, a network operator, a market operator who has traditionally worked with program implementers. So these are your full service customer recruitment, enrollment, registration, asset management, billing, and financial settlement platforms, to allow for individual asset types, regional specific aggregations to all play into the same platform and streamline procurement of flexibility, capacity, all the value elements that these DERs and VPPs can deliver. I think we've seen, as I mentioned, the bring your own device program design show some early success in places like Hawaii, Green Mountain Power, and Vermont. which allow some of these multiple asset types to be grouped together. However, as the forecast of DER deployment continues to accelerate, the range of these services and the value propositions that they can provide, utilities are going to be well served to utilize a neutral market layer, a marketplace like Electron Connect that can allow each asset to bid in, provide value in the ways that's best suited for the market and for the customer at which those assets are cited.
So just, I guess, just building on that from our perspective and thinking about why have we built the platform Electron Connect and where do we see the value that we can bring to concepts like virtual power plants and that broader challenge of scaling, local flexibility, and unlocking the value of distributed energy resources. There's kind of two principal benefits, and it's really about servicing both sides of that market. You have utilities that want to access lower carbon, cleaner, cheaper energy, and they can do that through VPPs. And then you have the providers, the DRPs, the demand response providers, and consumers who own these devices who would like to get more value out of them, but perhaps are finding there's too much friction in that process. Either the aggregator, the VPP, is playing their resources into a single program. Maybe they can handle running a few, but like Matt talked about stackability earlier, it's really hard to have the visibility to then play in multiple markets. You really end up just stuck in one particular program or one particular initiative. So for the providers, the demand response assets, there is friction, we would argue, in their ability to participate in these types of programs and initiatives. There's different enrollment steps, different data standards, different APIs to hook into, and really that just creates too much friction and means that we're unable to unlock the value and unable to maximize value for those resources. And then on the utility side, a similar problem, like a lack of visibility. They're having to maintain and manage multiple programs at once. They're running them in isolated or technology-specific programs, so they aren't maximizing the value within a geography. They're just thinking about a specific technology type. So on both sides, some friction, some lack of visibility. And really the market is there to simplify that. It's a set of rules, common standards and processes that makes it easier for multiple types of resource, whether it's through a VPP or through a bring your own device program or directly. We can make the process straightforward and simple and repeatable and standard. And that can be done through APIs. We can set clear rules in the market itself so that it's clear for the resources where the opportunity is and give them better visibility across multiple programs, across multiple geographies. And for the utility, we give them that one single pane of glass for them to see where their assets are, where the need within the network is for any potential demand response, and then to engage with those resources with a few clicks of a button rather than multiple manual programs being ran through spreadsheets and phone calls and emails. So the aim really is to create more standardization in the user experience on both sides of that market. And that applies to the implementers too, who are running these programs on behalf of the utilities. So we touched on it earlier, but really at its simplest form is just about streamlining the experience so that more assets can take part, lowering the barriers to entry on the provider side, and increasing visibility and coordination between the buyer and the seller.
Cool. Thank you very much, guys. So that brings our webinar close to the end. Thank you for your time today. If you would like to learn more about the US flexibility landscape, this week we launched a new white paper that explores the value of flex in the US and key lessons that we've learned across the UK and Europe. You can download this by scanning the QR code on your screen, or if you go to our website, www.electron.net, in the resources section, you'll find publications on the drop-down, and this white paper is within there as well. So take a look and let us know if you've got any feedback as well. Cool. So thank you very much. If you are at Distributech later this month, we're going to be there. We'd love to see you. If you are there, we'll be on booth 702A, which is in the Initiate Pavilion. Equally, if you want to jump on a call, you can scan the QR code here to access a form, or again, jump on our website and you can contact us via there. So thank you very much. Thanks, Chris and Matt, for your contribution today, and I hope everyone has a great day.
Thanks, everybody. See you soon.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.